Real-world history has always been a big source of inspiration for Star Wars in many categories. But today we're going to get a bit more specific and look at two places where events and people directly from history in World War II inspired similar characters or events in Star Wars comics. In particular, we're looking at events and characters inspired by the surrender of France. One of these is very clearly and openly inspired by World War II, but the first one we'll look at, I'm open to the idea that it's just a coincidence. You'll have to let me know what you think in the comments. When the Third French Republic surrendered to Germany in 1940, the armistice at Compiègne between Germany and France imposed harsh terms on the French, leaving half of the country directly occupied while the other half was left at least theoretically self-governing. This French state is known more commonly as Vichy France, after the city from which it was run in practice. The president of Vichy France was Marshal Philippe Pétain, who had succeeded Paul Renaud as Prime Minister of France, and then Albert Lebrun, who had held the position of president before the constitutional laws of July 10, 1940 were passed by the French National Assembly, which were what allowed the formation of the Vichy regime under Pétain. While Pétain was seen as a hero of World War I, he, along with Renaud and Lebrun, were convinced that further attempts to resist Germany were futile, and this new regime served as a collaborationist partner to the Germans. In Star Wars in the Legacy era, there is a renewed Sith Empire under Darth Krayt. Leading up to this, there had been a war from 127 to 130 ABY, or years after the Battle of Yavin, between Roenfel's empire, which had been all but taken over by the Sith, and the Galactic Alliance. The alliance was on the back foot, and a newly minted Rear Admiral, Piers Pétain, convinced the Galactic Alliance's commanding triumvirate to launch an offensive at the planet Caamas, where the Empire was about to negotiate a potential alliance with the Chiss Ascendancy and Hapes Consortium, which, if successful, would spell certain defeat for the Galactic Alliance. Pétain argued that if the Galactic Alliance could strike a decisive blow against the Empire, particularly by capturing or killing Emperor Roenfel, the war could quickly be ended in their favor. The leadership reluctantly agreed, sending most of their active forces into what turned out to be a trap.
It's a trap!
Yeah, man, that's what I just said. Anyways, their intelligence indicated that Fel would have only a small escort, but the entire fleet of Grand Admiral Morlish Veed was present, and quickly gained the upper hand against the Galactic Alliance. Facing what he felt was certain defeat, Pétain surrendered the remaining elements of the fleet to Veed and the Empire. Admiral Garstazi, one of the other remaining admirals of the Galactic Alliance present at Caamas, refused to recognize this surrender as legitimate, instead choosing to like this video and subscribe for more, and then to fight on as the leader of the Galactic Alliance remnant. This situation, in my opinion, is a direct reference to the French in World War II. While Pétain and Pétain do not do entirely analogous actions here, and we don't have a reason to believe that Pétain went on to lead a collaborationist fascist regime, I think the name Pétain was chosen for the admiral who surrenders as a direct reference to Vichy France, contrasted with Admiral Garstazi and the Galactic Alliance remnant, who were essentially represented as the Free French of Charles de Gaulle. I've never actually seen any confirmation that this was the intent, but to me the similarity in name for a character whose sole action is surrendering to the Nazi analogs of the books feels like it's probably not a coincidence. So let me know on this one, do you think this was intentional or am I reading into it too much? The next one, though, is definitely based on events in World War II and still keeps us in Vichy France. Shortly after the armistice at Compiègne, Britain grew concerned by the fate of the French fleet, which was largely unharmed in the fighting with Germany early on in the war, and it was split between several locations, though the vast majority were in either Toulon in France itself or in Mers el-Kebir in French Algeria. Britain worried that Germany would take the French fleet, giving them a significant advantage over Britain in the Atlantic, dismissing German guarantees that this would not be the case from the armistice based on how little German guarantees had meant before. And in fact, the German Kriegsmarine and Mussolini in Italy did hope to acquire French naval assets, so these fears weren't unfounded. France's naval minister, Admiral Darlan, had also ordered the ships at Toulon to scuttle if it came to that, fearing the same thing that the British did. He hoped these assurances would be enough to convince Prime Minister Winston Churchill that the French fleet would not be a threat, but it was not. British forces quickly began planning Operation Catapult, where they would attempt to seize or destroy as much of the French Navy as possible. Several elements of the French fleet were already in Allied territory, including in Britain itself, allowing these ships to be seized relatively easily, although there was some bloodshed between British and French troops even in these situations. At the Alexandria port in Egypt, Admiral Godefroy negotiated with Cunningham of Britain to intern a sizable chunk of the French fleet present there, most of which ended up joining the Free French Resistance down the line. This still left the bulk of the French navy at Toulon and Mers el-Kebir. Toulon was considered too well defended to do much about, but Britain launched a force under Admiral James Somerville to negotiate with Admiral Gensoul at Mers el-Kebir to intern the force there, which consisted of 4 battleships and 6 destroyers, along with some other ships. Before negotiations, which were going nowhere, were officially closed, the British began to deploy mines on July 3, 1940, and the nearby French ports began to send patrols to engage the British fleet threatening Mers el-Kebir, though none were able to make contact as the fleet had returned to Gibraltar. This French response prompted Churchill to urge Somerville to take direct action, which led to 2 direct attacks on Mers el-Kebir by the British. The first attack took out much of the fleet, but then a follow-up raid on July 8th was done in Operation Lever, prompted because Britain felt the damage to the battleships Provence and Dunkirk was insufficient. 5 British aircraft were also taken down in the totality of both raids and the mine-laying operation. There were a lot of further implications, follow-ups, and recriminations about this event, including in Case Anton, where Germany did in fact take over Vichy France directly and attempted to take the French fleet. That attempt did fail thanks to Darlan's order to scuttle the fleet before they could be taken, but hopefully that's enough background to give you an idea of what went on. The Republic comics, to get back to Star Wars, have a very similar plotline set during the Clone Wars, where a major shipyard world in the Republic, Rendili, is considering joining the Separatists. Rendili is used as one example of a planet where the home defense fleet of a planet, in Rendili's case primarily made up of Dreadnought-class cruisers, could pose a significant threat to the Republic's war effort, and as a result, Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, much like Churchill, orders for the formerly Allied fleet to be destroyed before it can fall into enemy hands. Jedi Master Plo Koon, in charge of the Republic fleet negotiating with the Rendilians, also indicates that this is intended to prevent other home defense fleets from considering joining the Separatists. Plo Koon hoped that he'd be able to negotiate Rendili rejoining the Republic thanks to his long-standing friendship with the commander of Rendili's fleet, Jace Dallin, whom he'd worked with directly before during the Stark Hyperspace War a few decades earlier. While events as they play out diverge a bit from the attack on Mers el-Kebir, we get one pretty clear indication of where the inspiration for this plotline overall comes from. Dallin's ship, where Plo Koon attempts to negotiate with Dallin, is named Mers el-Kebir, so that one I think is pretty clear even if the Patan thing isn't. Plo Koon attempts to appeal to Dallin's loyalty to the Republic, but when Dallin seems to be swayed by Plo Koon's arguments into realigning with the Republic, claiming separatists have forced Rendili's government to oppose the Republic, Dallin and the other senior officers are imprisoned along with Plo Koon, and the separatist-aligned Lieutenant Yago takes command of the Rendili fleet. The blockade of Rendili continued under the command of Saesee Tiin, while Yago hoped the hostages they took would mean they could delay long enough for the separatist support promised by Count Dooku to arrive and assist the Rendili fleet in breaking the Republic's control, much like the French hoped with the support they attempted to give Mers el-Kebir from Toulon and Algiers, except in this case the support arrived, and Tin's forces found themselves trapped between the separatist support, consisting of at least 2 Lucrehulk core ships, and the Rendili home fleet. 2 of the Republic's acclamators, Triumph and Anita, engaged each of the core ships, while the 3rd acclamator, Sundiver, attempted to engage Mers el-Kebir, the dreadnought, not the Algerian port. Yago ordered the dreadnoughts to all link their nav systems together, attempting to jump all ships out at the same time, but this plan was foiled by Anakin Skywalker destroying the astro navigation display on Mers el-Kebir itself, preventing any of the ships from jumping, even though destroying a display to stop that sounds like saying a computer stops working if you destroy the monitor, but that's not my fault. Take it up with the comics. Meanwhile, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Quinlan Vos were able to free Plo Koon and Jace Dallin, who killed Yago and re-established command over the Rendili home fleet. A Republic victory soon followed as the combined strength of Rendili and the Republic finished the remaining separatist forces off, successfully keeping Rendili in the fold. So again, despite the clear influences and inspiration for the basic plot elements of a formerly allied fleet being blockaded and the decision being made to destroy them to prevent them from falling into enemy hands, we do have a bit of divergence from the real history here. Not enough that I think it actually hides the, in my opinion, pretty clear intent. Either way, that's going to do it for our look at these particular historical influences in Star Wars. Let me know in the comments if there's any other topics you'd like to see covered in the future. Remember to leave a like and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.